time. Throwing this time wide open. He's got his man. The 10, the 5. Touchdown, Chad Hansen. Gonna throw, and he hits his man. Out to midfield, David Johnson, and more. Johnson inside the 40. Hit the upright and bounced it through. Watson with the pass. Touchdown. Kiki QT. The Colts on a last-minute fumble by the Texans survived 26-20.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. We're joined this week by Mark Lane, editor of the Texans Wire, as we attempt to piece together lightning striking twice in Indy, just as it did in Houston 2 weeks ago. And the Texans managed to get the ball down to the 2 again and fumble again. Mark, have you ever seen two occurrences so eerily similar happen in the space of 3 weeks?
No, and given the fact that it was the same direction on the television too, the right side of the TV, it was, it was just unbelievable to see that happen, and it completed a series sweep. They talk about history doesn't repeat itself; it rhymes, and that was a case of history rhyming.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's been a funny old season. I think, and there's been. I saw a stat, and I think we had 9 one-score games last year. We won 7 of them, and that was always a facet of the O'Brien era. You could win close games, and a big part of that was, I think, because you had a defense that would keep you in games. But this year we've lost the vast majority of the one-score close games. If you think of the game in Nashville, obviously the game 3 weeks ago. And then on Sunday, it's just not been this team's year, despite obvious talent deficiencies.
Yeah, and part of it is the fact that it's the defense. Teams know that to get their yards, to sustain their drives, just run the ball. And the interior of the Texans defense has been unable to stop the run. You've had some guys freelancing too. According to, just some inferences that interim coach Romeo Crennel has made. And it's been harder to stay in games. It's basically been Watson has to play at a Pro Bowl level, which, oh, by the way, he has. He earned his 3rd Pro Bowl. Or Houston just gets beat by 17 points. I mean, those have been your options this season. And again, the not winning the close games, there's an element of luck that goes into that, and it really hasn't been on Houston's side. You look at the Pittsburgh game, what if that would have gone differently? Or the Vikings game, Houston may have been sitting at 2-2, O'Brien's still employed. The Jackson, I mean, you just even go beyond that when he was fired, and you stay in the Romeo Crennel era. If they get that 2-point conversion against the Tennessee Titans and they win that game, their fortunes change dramatically at that point, because now the Titans have taken a ding in their record and the Texans have a little more confidence. I mean, it could have turned out a lot differently for Houston. And then just the Colts series alone, if they win that first game, they're riding a 3-game winning streak. Maybe they don't collapse in Chicago. But it's been brutal for Houston all year long. The only 2 bright spots that they have had are Deshaun Watson and Laramie Tunsil. But I still have to give this team credit for continuing to fight and put their best foot forward each week, and frankly make an audition for whoever the new head coach, whoever the new general manager is going to be, because they're saying, look, we may have had a disastrous season this year, one that doesn't meet our expectations, but we're a winning football team. Believe in us, surround us with the right talent, get us the right coach in here, and we will be competitive in the AFC.
Yeah, and I think if you said you were going to go on the road, put 425 yards, a total offense, you're going to be 8 for 15 on 3rd down, you think you probably got a chance. But it's just, it feels like this season at many points, whether it been in Pittsburgh or whether it been the failed 2 point conversion in Nashville. I think the Texans just seem just to not be able to piece it together, and at really key times as well. And like you said, it's a bit of luck in there, but the fumbling on the two, twice, it just shows you it's not your year. But there just feels like this team just can't quite play what, as O'Brien used to call it. It was complementary football, and they continue to just find strange ways to lose games. And and I think as well, the biggest thing, Mark, is just the lack of turnovers. The offense turns it over again twice, one at the end and one to set up a 14-0 hole that you're sitting in the first quarter. And you think just statistically next year, even if this team doesn't get that much better, surely the turnover train can just turn in their direction that little bit more than it has done this year, because it's almost unprecedented how few times they've turned over the ball in their favor.
Yeah, they only have 8 takeaways through 14 games. I mean, that is a dry spell, and it puts a ton of pressure on the offense to play perfect football. You have to have every possession end in a kick, and hopefully, not a 3 and out when you're referring to a kick. But it has been unprecedented, and I think some of what hurt the complimentary football though was trading DeAndre Hopkins, because that just set up a new dynamic, which the team has worked its way into successfully, of having a new passing game, and then losing DJ Reader, not adequately addressing the interior of your defensive line for 2020. You did with Ross Blacklock, drafting him in the second round. But in terms of who can play now, who can contribute now, I mean, it's got to be better than Brandon Dunn, and it wasn't. And teams were just able to run the football at will, and get their yards. And then on top of that, the running. Where was the running game the whole year for Houston? I mean, they didn't have a 100-yard runner, and it's been very problematic. And they have some areas that they need to address in the off season. But even though they're probably going to finish 5-11, they still there's still a lot to be optimistic about this team, even though they don't have their two first draft, their first and second round draft picks in the upcoming draft. There's still a lot to be optimistic about with this team.
Yeah, I think Blacklock's potentially got to be a worry now at this stage, because even he played limited snaps, and I thought it was strange that they released Corey Lugic this week when he played a big chunk of the snaps in the
Yeah,
middle there. And then and I think Carlos Watkins, you'll want to burn that tape because he was manhandled and they took him out. And then even the guy I follow as Alafalu, Big Z as I call him, came
yeah,
in number 98, and he looked okay at times, big body, and he looked like he could move a bit. He was chasing down the ball, and you think that defensive line has just cost us so many times week on week, and it continued to do again. You just saw Jonathan Taylor just get a hold of the game. There was a drive where it ended in a field goal in the second half, and it was pretty much a run on every play. And I think when you're in that position as a defense, you just can't, you can't stop the dam at times. But I think again, the defense grew into it, in their credit the second half, because until that drive where the dart down the middle of T.Y. Hilton, when for some reason split safety coverage, you got three verts going down the field, and that leaves Tyrell Adams again. He probably didn't have a good game again this week, like he didn't against Chicago, but he's got three. They got three verts. It leaves the linebacker trailing probably their fastest receiver, and it was just a crucial time to give up a big play and a big drive, when actually in the second half they hadn't had a first down until that point.
yeah, and it's. But again, to me, it goes to the run game, because they've kept Houston's defense off balance the entire year, and you also don't have the personnel you'd like out there. But I think Tyrell Adams has filled in nicely for Benardrick McKinney. The secondary is virtually nobody left. Even Philip Gaines is injured, was absent. So was John Reed. But I think that the defense, obviously, they need to address their holes in free agency.
Yeah, the problem is I don't know if they can because but I did see an article from Over the Cap and it talked about sunk money and it basically counted all your draft picks from the last 2 years because you can't renegotiate, you can only really release them, so you're due out that money. Actually, the Texans were in, I think, the bottom 5 or 6, only 37% of their total cap carryover number was sunk in terms of this sort of terminology. So actually, I think there's been a lot made of the cap, but then when you looked at it from that angle, it looks like that there is flexibility there, and there is definitely flexibility. I think there's a lot of big decisions to be made. I thought it was ironic that Merciless actually set the edge for one of the first times this season. Then he flagged to the sideline. He had to come off. It looked like he'd hurt his arm. So I will wait and see what that comes out in the injury report tomorrow. But it's I think the defense has just put us off far too often. And I think, but what stood out to me again in this game is you take the 2 fumbles out of it, but even on the drive we did score. So even on the Chad Hansen drive, you've got Roderick Johnson gets beat by Denigro Autry. Then the next play, you've got a false start by Tunsil, but then somehow Watson overcomes the situation and Hansen's there for a 37-yard score. And then again, when Scotty Phillips was in there, there was a call overturned by the rest by Frank Reich's challenge. Then Aikens has a false start in the red zone. And then you end up settling for a field goal right on half time. And actually, the drive was coming together. So it's just these small things that, a lot of it's just down to coaching, but a lot of it's just down to player discipline as well and how tuned in these guys are. And there was small little problems like this that just add up, penalties at the wrong time. Because even the final drive, your Kiki fumble, there was a number of penalties and giving up sacks and just plays that are just avoidable, And I think there's that sort of level of cohesion on offense, in every statistical category. Watson is now broke his own record for most touchdowns. He only needs another 2 to equal Matt Schaub's long time record of 29, which should have been broken at least 2 years ago. But if there's been big steps forward for the offense, regardless of the personnel out there, and that's just a sign of how much Watson's developed. But it just feels like there's so many small little details around each drive and around the offense. If we could just improve that 5-10%, I think that would make a big difference. And you're taking the lead 3 weeks ago, you're tying the game and taking it to overtime this Sunday.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying in terms of the luck is they just kind of collapsed during key moments, and it's just come from, I think, part of the malaise of the 2020 season from a Texans perspective. Going into this game, I believe Watt, in his media availability, said that it's always, it's always something with this year, whether it's guys getting suspended or people getting fired or whatever. It's always something. And I think that they've been caught up in just the whirlwind of, the drama. They haven't done a good job of keeping the ups and downs away from playing consistently, which is what you have to do in football because, 90% of it sometimes, 90% sometimes, no, 90% of it is getting your butt kicked. And you get 10% that's good. So that's why you have to just stay consistent in your approach, is you don't want to live off of that 10% winning and good feeling all the time because of how rare it is. You just want to be consistent, and they haven't been able to do that. I think the one consistent element in this whole thing has been Deshaun Watson, which is why I think that his Pro Bowl, I was very pleased to see him get nominated for a Pro Bowl because I was worried that he would just get overlooked because, the Texans are 4-10, he's the problem, and you got to lead and you got to win and all those cliches. I'm glad to see that he got recognition for being one of the conference's best quarterbacks because he has been. I mean, let's take a quarterbackless team that's out there right now. If you put Deshaun Watson, let's say, on the New England Patriots, because that's everyone's favorite rumor from the offseason, you do that, and they have the number 1 overall seed. I mean, he's played excellent football. He has lived up to the expectations from when they signed that contract, which, by the way, isn't it funny how when some players, they get a contract, they kind of fall off? Can't say that about Watson. He gets the new contract, first year delivers. But that's who he is. He's a winner. So now what they have to do is they have got to find a front office boss and a coach that can get that type of winning mentality from Watson and permeate it throughout the team.
Yeah, and that's the big challenge. And I think the contract at the time, it was always going to be sort of market leading. I think there was no other way around it. I think it was good to get it handled early. It was probably one of the only off-season moves they made that was actually any good, because you got your franchise guy, locked in for another 3 years after this, another 4 years after this. So, I think the thing that I keep going back to is he's taken a huge step forward this year, Mark. No doubt about it. But I think he's got more to grow. And there was a couple of throws. There was one to the one to Kahali Wearing. If he just lays out in front of him, he probably scores a touchdown. There was a couple other ones where he just didn't quite see the crosser, and he seems to struggle with crossers for some reason. But they're just small things, and if that's the biggest problem with your quarterback, you're living okay. And it just feels like there's more growth to come, and I think he's going to get even better. And you just got to hope, like you said, that the franchise can sort this out and get winning caliber and players of a winning mentality around them to take his game to the next level. Because if he's getting the ball with short fields, which he's not done this year, if he's got a more consistent array of pass catchers, and if he's just got a decent running game, so I keep going back to that, and I think that was probably the biggest positive I took from Sunday watching the tape back, was that actually that was the first time I've seen us all year, and I don't know why we waited till week 15 to do it, but the distribution of the ball between the running backs and the use of David Johnson felt like we just missed a big number there, because that was the role that I think everybody had for David Johnson around him. When he came in the trade, you thought, they must have a specific role carved out for that guy. Obviously value him highly, that skill set must fit. And it took this whole time, concussions and etc. aside, but it took this whole time to get an efficient use of running back. I thought Buddy Howell looked good, and I think you're not even asking for a lot, but the reason why Deshaun played well and got the team out of a 14-0 hole was because, we had 83 yards on the ground, and it's not great, but it's a hell of a lot better than it's been. And, what a difference that made in Sunday. So if you can get a good running game around them, I think you're just going to see him take even further steps forward.
Yeah, and that's what I was hoping to get from David Johnson this season was, you saw how well Carlos Hyde did behind the same offensive line, and you figured that Johnson could have a renaissance. But instead, I just think that Houston got chased out of the run so much because of the defense, again, going back to complementary football. And I also think that is part of the reason why Johnson was not featured so much in the passing game, was because you had to take so many deep shots. You had to look for your chunk plays. Also, those chunk plays were there anyway with Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks. And so now that they've had to come back a little bit, play a little more intermediate passing game, Johnson's been available. But, it's still, unfortunately for him, has been a disappointing season. And frankly, for all the running backs, there hasn't been anyone that's really displayed, you know what I mean, just really broken out. They've all been curtailed. And I do think that it was good to see Buddy Howell get some carries. I know Andre Ware on the Texans radio network play-by-play, he's the color commentator. When Buddy Howell got his carries against Chicago, He's saying, "Thank you." I mean, why? Where has this been? And Hal does. He provides kind of that burst, that bruising style that Alfred Blue had, and um, he's an unrestricted free agent this year, so he'll probably be gone from the team, or maybe not. They may bring him back, but it was good to see Hal get some of his carries, and then also Scotty Phillips. I think that the closer you get to the end of the year, maybe you give him some carries, maybe not because he'll be coming back. Um, but they've got to find some solutions for this running game, only because you need to provide an effective complement for Deshaun Watson, so he's not having to do it all.
Yeah, and I mean the I think the biggest swing in this game was the 2 field goals you kick, one at the end of the first half.
Yeah, too many of their drives ended in field goals this season, and that has been a part of the luck factor, if you will, and also it's played a part in when Fairbairn misses, then that sets everything else up, and that's why you don't have as great of a finish. So yeah, they've too many of their red zone opportunities have ended in field goals.
Yeah, and I think they've missed Cartwell's Hyde, and then I think when the Colts could just rush 4, and pretty much I think every single one of the linemen, include Laramie and now, because I think for some reason he has a problem with their edge rusher Muhammad, because there's about 3 or 4 clips I've watched them get worked by that guy. But when you can only rush 4 and still get pressure and collapse the pocket, and then in the red zone when you're just dropping 7 bodies in there, it's almost impossible to try and find guys if you only got 5 guys on route. So it's tough to it's really tough to find space in that. And I think the again it goes back to the running game of a running game that just can't get out its own way at times, and you can't really set up those 12, 13 personnel sets, and you can dump it off to a tight end that fakes out the blocks releases, and he's empty in the end zone. You just can't set those looks up because people don't respect it. Yeah, and I think the drive that to level the game. I think was potentially one of their best drives of the year, and I think it was the variance of it, and and again it comes back to that effective use and the rotation of running backs, and why it's taken this long. I don't know. When you think it's a simple thing, and that all the O'Brien coaching staff and including his reign, they just continued to get that position wrong. But he just showed you what a difference it made, because it was a simple drive, and it won't ever stand out. But I think in terms of how we've played and where our deficiencies have been this year against a top 5 defense, it showed you not only if you manage your running backs and your short and intermediate game well, and then Watson can do his thing when he gets time in the pocket. It will, and it was a simple drive, but it was Watson to David Johnson for 14, Watson to David Johnson for 5, then Scotty Phillips comes in for 4, then a no gain, then a 4-yard gain for Watson scramble. Then you get a 23-yard to your tight end, which we've not really done a huge amount apart from Aikens here and there. Then Buddy Howell comes in and gets 7 yards, and then Aikens gets another 6 yards, and then shotgun David Johnson again for 8 yards, and then you hit Kiki for 9. And it was just a varied drive. And I think like you said, Mark, I think there was always a fear, or there was always a let's just hit a long ball and that'll give us some momentum. But just that systematic breakdown of a defense and just taking what they give you, and because there'll always be a play there, you just got to take it. And I think that was probably the best drive we put together this offseason, considering the circumstances on the road late in the year. It's been a bad season, but it was Watson talked about it just being the surgeon, and that was it right there in that drive.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is there have been elements of winning football throughout the season, and what the new head coach has got to do is figure out how to put them all together in one cohesive month, one cohesive game. Just have all of these elements come together consistently and frequently, and then they should be able to, like I said, go back to being contenders in the AFC. But with regards to the running backs and why did it take them so long and so forth, I think some of it has been just the necessity. When Duke Johnson can't play, when David Johnson has the concussion and he gets put on the 3 week injured reserve, when David Johnson has gets placed on COVID reserve, it created those situations where they had to adapt, and then in those adaptations, they discovered something that worked. And unfortunately, they discovered it when they're 4-10, but nonetheless, they found something that hopefully they can take into the off season, presuming that they let Tim Kelly stay as offensive coordinator, and then you can start to work those elements in 2021.
Do you think Tim Kelly's got a chance to be on the next coaching staff then?
Yeah, I do. If they go defensive, I do. If they go offensive, probably not, because I don't think that it's rare that you see an offensive-minded coach keep the same offensive coordinator in place. Same goes for defense with the defensive coordinator. If they go defensive-minded coach, yeah, I think he's got a good shot to stay.
I suppose the only thing that concerns me about that is he only knows one scheme, and I think the scheme at times has been okay, but I think there's ways and different, and I don't know how much creativity he's been given. I'm assuming he has since O'Brien's left. You've seen that in some of the play calling, but I think he's learned under one scheme for so long, and I don't think that's necessarily suited to Watson's skill set. Now, it has been better this year, without a doubt. I think it's been the best year of Watson's career, and a big part of that, and Tim Kelly deserves credit. I just when it comes back to, and I've heard many people say this as well, but how many of the other 31 franchises would he give Tim Kelly an offensive coordinator role based on his resume?
Yeah, and that is one of the problems when when a coach has come up under one coach, in this case, Bill O'Brien, they kind of get pigeonholed there. But who would? I think the Jets would. I think wherever O'Brien lands, I think he'd take him. Um, I would have to see the. Let's see. Would Atlanta want Tim Kelly? I don't know. It depends on who goes there. Um, but I think that Kelly. Here's what I noticed was earlier in the year. Watson was not running. They didn't have him doing a lot of run pass option, and his play action passes were really low. And then it was like once O'Brien got fired, all of that opened up, and it depends on if the new coach wants to stay patient and let Tim Kelly continue to have his on the job training, because he did he did talk about his play calling. He said in the beginning he was trying to find the perfect play call, when he realized it's really more about just eliminating bad play calls, more so than just finding the absolute perfect play call. Um, but I think some of it has been the talent uh, with the running game, and it's not effectively been there. And they've just had to rely on Watson the whole time. But if Tim Kelly comes back, I don't think that the offense is going to be bad. I think it'll be well. They just have to address running back and figure out the run game.
Yeah, I don't know how much Mike Devlin's still got a hand in that, in the run game and everything he's touched. I don't think it's necessarily, born any success for this team.
I think a lot. Devlin is still around, and really, I think until you can, because here's the thing about Mike Devlin. This was said on January the 6th, 2019. It was the day after they lost to the Colts in the wild card game, and Bill O'Brien mentioned his guys that he leans on, and he mentioned Romeo Crennel, Brad Seeley, and Mike Devlin. And so Devlin has been a part of that Bill O'Brien core of coaches, and I think that he has played a large hand in the scheme with the run game. And if you can get away from him, like I said, I would be willing to let Tim Kelly have another shot at it. Um, just go out and get a defensive minded coach, because I feel like that has been some of the problem. Is just I feel like what this team needs is it needs someone with really high situational football awareness. That's what they need, because when you're going, like, take for example what happened in the Baltimore game. Bill O'Brien goes for it on fourth down from, I think, their own 31
37, I
yard
think.
line,
Yeah,
when
something like
earlier
that.
in
Yeah.
the first quarter they were at the Ravens 44 even though it was a 4th and 9, but they punt. That's where I would have gone for it, because then the loss would not have been as great as it was the loss on the 4th and 1 from your own 31. So, but you've seen that even with Romeo Crennel. I get his thinking, um, in terms of going for it against Tennessee, uh, but you've still kind of seen, uh, it has been, you need a restoration of the complementary football and just kind of an overall sense of the game, because in having a franchise quarterback like Deshaun Watson, yes, he can win Pro Bowls, he can make, he can really fuel the check downs Twitter feed for a whole Sunday. Well, okay, we get it with the highlights. But what having a franchise quarterback really does is it allows you to control the game, because he's not going to make a lot of mistakes and turn the ball over and have a bunch of 3-and-outs. And that's just Sean Watson's greatest asset. And I feel like if you pair him with a defensive minded coach that is going to play field position, take all of that into account, a la Brady and Belichick, that's what I think the winning formula is.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's so many directions I think they could go in. My sort of kind of, I mean, and the more you think about it, you can swing over time in terms of different thoughts on it. But I think for me, Tim Kelly, and I think Weaver, when he talked about during the week and the run up to the game of we need some help, and I think that was maybe him just putting that out there that it's not all on me and there's talent there, deficiencies, which is obvious, and that kind of comment to me maybe suggests that he's not going to be here next year, and he probably knows that. But I think if there's potentially a place on the staff for them, but I don't know if it's necessarily a coordinator. You maybe want some
Yeah,
carryover.
I don't think he'd take a downgrade either.
Yeah.
I don't think he would go back to being a position coach either.
No, I don't think you would. I think once you step up, it's hard to take a step back down unless you're fired from somewhere, mid-season or something like that. And it's a certain, like if you saw Greg Williams left the Jets the other week, he'll probably struggle to get another OC job, even though he is predominantly has been a good OC in his career. But the issue I think is that you need to refresh stuff on either side of the ball, and I think that extra 5-10% improvements you could find on offense potentially comes through a new scheme and something that's just a bit more varied and fresh, and you may not necessarily want to go away from all the principles and all the concepts that were in O'Brien's play, but I think it certainly needs evolved. And if you were to keep Kelly here, I think you would need somebody to come in with it from a different type of scheme, not too dissimilar, but a different type of scheme to come in and just refresh the playbook a bit, because at times it's got stale, and I think that was the issue. But I think and you saw Quincy Avery talk about that as well, that it was the play calling and O'Brien's lack of willingness to go for it and be adventurous and take shots, and then you saw Tim Kelly didn't have that pressure because in his head probably he's not here next year either. Some of the coaching hires. Jim Caldwell is one of the first, or is the first, officially to be announced by the team they're interviewing. And what do you think of that? He's not been in the game since 2017.
Yeah, I think that interviewing Jim Caldwell is just part of the process, doing their due diligence, interviewing folks that are available right now during the season, because the folks you do want to talk to, you got to wait for their season to be over. I also got an article on Texans Wire on why it makes sense if you want to go check that out. But basically, Caldwell has been around great quarterbacks. Peyton Manning, he was his quarterback coach from 2002 to 2008. He's his head coach from '09 to 2011. And then he was Curtis Painter's head coach. But anyway, um, he was around Matthew Stafford 2014, 2017. The frequency of playoff qualification that the Lions had during his coaching tenure had not been seen in that organization since Barry Sanders from 1989 to 98. He was also the interim offensive coordinator, quarterback coach for the Baltimore Ravens in 2012 when Joe Flacco had one of his greatest seasons when he had an 11 touchdown, 0 interception TD INT ratio, and they won the Super Bowl that year. So he can get the most out of good quarterbacks, and he also is. Just look what he did with Detroit. They had only made the playoffs one time since 2000. He gets there, and they have 3 winning seasons in the span of his 4-year tenure. They've been trashed since he left. I think that hiring him, let me just say this. I think that you'd still be competitive. You'd kind of be back to the O'Brien, the glory years of the O'Brien days, but I don't think that he can really put you over the top and win a Super Bowl. He's 65 years old. I think he's been figured out, so to speak, in terms of the NFL. So I would prefer that they go younger, but I also do like that they put him in the mix.
Yeah, I think he's the kind of guy that, like, I mean, as you said, his record there at Detroit, I think is more success than they've had since and before. And yeah, I heard Bill Polian speak recently, and he talked highly of Jim Caldwell. He said, one of the first names I pick up the phone to. And I think he's a kind of guy. If you do get he's a good guy. Like when O'Brien brought in Cornell, it's the same kind of setup. I think he's an experienced head on either side of the ball. Doesn't it might just be assistant head coach, or it might be it's something in that role. But I think guys like that still have something to offer. I don't think it would be a popular one, but in terms of the fan base, if you were to appoint Jim Caldwell, quite the opposite. But there's guys there, and I think the biggest thing or the mistake that O'Brien era had is that there's obviously no salary cap on your coaching staff, and you can spend endlessly and getting as many heads and as many good people in the building to try and steer 53 men through a 16-week regular season. And there's guys like that you can extend your coaching staff beyond the limited base of coaches that O'Brien had. And I think that's definitely a positive. So he may be a name that may come around in some capacity if he's still got a lot to offer, and there's a rapport there. But I think he's definitely one that the traditional football people, particularly the guys that Cal's in the committee in inverted commas is approached. I think he'd definitely be a name that would recommend. Do you have, Mark, a favourite candidate that you'd want for head coach?
I'm torn between Robert Saleh and Matt Eberflus. Robert Saleh, obviously, and again, you see my philosophy. I think you got to go defense because, Robert Saleh, because he's had experience with the organization before, and he's done a lot with nothing this season with the San Francisco 49ers. I know they're 5-8, and the Dallas Cowboys managed to score 41 points on them, but that was more points off turnovers than it was anything to do with his actual defense. Richard Sherman's spoken very highly of him in terms of his ability to get those guys coached up, ready to go, be competitive despite the massive injuries that they've endured. I would go Salah, but another one that I would be interested in is Matt Eberflus, the defensive coordinator from the Indianapolis Colts. One, because you weaken the Colts. Two, more importantly, he was running the defensive meetings for the Dallas Cowboys in 2012, the last season that Rob Ryan was defensive coordinator there. He was running the meetings. He's been around great coaches. He's got that defense playing at a high level, and it's been a dependable unit for the Colts. And he went from linebackers coach, and then gets his first shot as defensive coordinator. He's also no nonsense. He doesn't get. I think he's a real consistent guy. He doesn't get fooled too much by success and by splash plays that players put on tape. I think he gets to the heart of the matter, and though that's someone that I would be pleased with if they interviewed him is Matt Eberflus.
Yeah, I think the common theme though, and I don't know what you think the answer to this is, Mark, but if you do hire a defensive coordinator, then the OC hire has to potentially be a big one. And I suppose I think that the train of thought that people like anyway is that Salah comes in with somebody from the Shanahan / Kubiak, Shanahan senior tree of play action, bootleg, kind of outside zone, kind of running. Do you think is that how you envisage the Salah hire to go? Because I think, well, certainly I think everybody in Detroit wants him there, and I wouldn't be surprised if Jacksonville want him there as well. And I'm sort of, as they're now sitting in the first overall pick, is Jacksonville now a potentially more appealing situation to both GM and head coach?
Well, you got to consider that. Salah was with
Jacksonville as well,
comes
yeah.
out of the Kubiak tree, but he also was in Seattle on that Super Bowl winning team in 2013. Offensive coordinator was Darrell Bevell. So what if you get Darrell Bevell as offensive coordinator, Robert Salah as your head coach? I mean, that would be kind of a win, I think, to get that pair. So that's what I'm saying with Salah. Is it doesn't necessarily have to be back to the Kubiak days, back to you know the bootlegs and all that kind of stuff. You can have someone who brings in a different offensive style, even though he is a defensive minded. I mean, even though he is a defensive coordinator.
Yeah. I just think in terms of the offensive core, I always just think, Matt Schaub was a limited quarterback, but if you look in, I don't know, it didn't pan out this weekend, but for the Rams as well, and they kind of play a similar kind of kind of system, and the amount of easy throws it gives, because that Chad Hansen touchdown, I know there was maybe, there's been a few, maybe Stills' touchdown in the playoff game against Kansas City last year, but you could probably count on one hand how many easy touchdowns that this current scheme offers. And I think a lot of it's all about matchups, and it's all about man on man winning that matchup. Whereas I think the thing about Kyle Shanahan and that scheme that's say Salah takes LaFleur's brother there from there as a defensive coordinator, for example, and they come in and input that scheme in here. I think it's probably not exactly to Deshaun's skill set, but I think it schematically, I think it gives you a lot more easier plays than this current one does potentially. Was my thought on that.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately that's what they have to do. I gave my philosophy. I could be totally wrong, but I think ultimately what they have to do is they have to find a coach that's going to get the most out of Deshaun Watson, because how many coaches they go to a team. I mean, let's say you're Adam Gase, for example. Even though he's Adam Gase, but you go to the Jets and they've got this rookie quarterback, and who knows what he can do. But you got him, and you go down to Miami. and Brian Flores. I mean, he's got Ryan Fitzpatrick and then Josh Rosen, who the Arizona Cardinals didn't want. But if you can be a coach and you come to a team and you've got 3-time Pro Bowler Deshaun Watson under center, I mean, that's it. That you don't have to do any more evaluation during the offseason. You don't have to devote any more of that. Your player personnel department doesn't have to focus on that. It's settled. That is such a huge step for an organization and really a coaching staff. But also, this is a decade of opportunity for Cal McNair and the Texans because Watson is also still young enough in his career that you can bring in a a new offensive coordinator, a new coaching, style, and he's going to go along with it. He's not old and crusty and wedded to some old way and going to bicker with the coach. Um, so it's a very optimistic moment for Houston, and I think that has been some of the problem with O'Brien's scheme, and it is one of the problems that's still out there. It's like 90s, 2000s football that's still here today, which is just win your matchup instead of just do your job relative to the scheme we're running, you know? And if they could make it easier on Watson, I would try to incorporate him in a scheme where he doesn't take as many hits because he's put a lot of tread has come off that tire in terms of the hits he's taken through the first 3 full seasons as a starter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think if you look at this sort of kind of Gruden, and he's not been a great GM, and I think that's probably held that this new reign at in now in Las Vegas back. But if you look at that scheme, I think just the way it's set up, the way the ball comes out on time and in rhythm, I think something like that, where Derek Carr doesn't take many hits at all. He's aided by a decent line, Rodney Hudson and guys like that up front, but the ball comes out on a rhythm and it just it takes that element away from it. And I think that's been the biggest issue of and this was probably referencing earlier about easy plays, layups, and you saw that on Sunday to a degree. But I think the O'Brien Yankee concept, 2 receiver routes, max protect, waiting for plays to develop, having to sail long passes, having to hold on the ball for 5 seconds, that kind of stuff. As you're right, it's not sustainable long term. And Tim Kelly's done a good job of getting away from that. But I think, I just don't think we could ever underestimate what a new scheme could do, and just takes Deshaun's game even further forward, like we mentioned earlier. Last week, Mark Lewis Riddick was in, it might have been Zoom, he might have been in NRG, not quite sure, but he was, the team confirmed officially he was in. What do you think of that? It feels like the ultimate PR move, but a guy that's been in an Eagles front office and certainly got some track record, and certainly a very sort of affable kind of clean leadership kind of guy that you might that potentially might be looking for.
Yeah, I hate to be one of those people, but if he's so good, why is he available? And
Yeah,
not
well,
just
yeah.
available, but available for 7 seasons. Last job he had was director of pro personnel for the Philadelphia Eagles,
Yeah, 2013. Yeah,
and he's done nothing since. But I mean, maybe TV's better. I know Twitter and um, the blogs. They all love Lewis Riddick and the great breakdowns. And look, it's true. I mean, it is. But in terms of running an organization, again, if he's so good, why has he been available? And that's, I hate to say it because it's such lazy analysis and a take on Riddick, and I really don't mean to disrespect his knowledge of the game or his experience inside of a front office. I mean, he was a player on the stage, an actor on the stage, so to speak. He was in the arena, you know, we weren't, so he deserves some respect in that regard. But again, in terms of looking for, I would much rather look inside an actual front office than the media for someone to take over this organization. And again, I mean, he did some great things in his career. Okay, he was the director of pro personnel for Washington during the last 3 seasons of Joe Gibbs's tenure there, and they made the playoffs in '05 and in '07. You know, so he was the assistant director of pro personnel with the Eagles in 2009, and that was a season where they got Michael Vick, and they drafted uh, they, they drafted LaShawn McCoy and Jeremy Maclin. So he's been around some success in that regard, but then boom, it goes away after he leaves the Eagles, and that's what I'm saying is why have you been out of football for 7 years, and can you still add something to a front office? You know, if if they gave him an interview and it later leads to Riddick getting back into football, and that's kind of what he needed. Not necessarily with the Texans, but elsewhere. Then that was really a great job on the part of Houston to do something like that. But I think they were taking a look at available candidates, and like you said, they weren't necessarily doing it for the public relations aspect, but that is kind of what it turned into, and they got a few pats on the back along the way.
Yeah, I think he's just a media face, isn't it? I think if you think of all the Easterby, all the O'Brien, all the all the mud that's been thrown at this organization and Cal and his leadership of it, and the SI article and all that kind of stuff that's come out, I think it just if you were to take a guy like that, it potentially washes that away, and whether that means he's necessarily the best GM out there, I don't think so. There was also rumors they were speaking to other guys that are out of work right now, Thomas Dimitrov and John Dorsey. Dorsey seems to be one that's peddled by Corn Ferry. I think if you pay somebody whatever fee it is to recommend John Dorsey a couple of times, and I think the Corn Ferry's track record suggests that they have done that a few times in in Cleveland, certainly, and in terms of some of the hires they've been involved with. What do you think of those guys? And I think, what do the timelines look like if we're having to wait for somebody, say a Ken Dodds from Indianapolis or whoever it might be, from a front office that make the playoffs? How does that impact your timeline? Because you saw Cal previously with the Brian Gain hire when Gutekunst was in the building. He went back to take the job in Green Bay. He gets a phone call late at night after going for O'Brien for a dinner, and they panicked and took somebody who was available. And you wonder, the longer those names are unavailable to interview, do you think they'll pull the trigger quicker than they should otherwise?
No, I think they'll be more deliberate than they were last time
Yeah,
because
well,
you've got
lesson
to
learned.
get this right. It's not just a you know you've got two big hires to make, and I think they'll be a little more deliberate. And a guy that I'd like to see them interview is Mike Borgonzi from the Kansas City Chiefs. He's their director of football operations. Um, he's someone that I'd like to see they take him and they make him the general manager. Um, and really, you got to cultivate from successful organizations, and I wouldn't go with a retread like Thomas Dimitrov and John Dorsey. I would try to go with someone that's in a successful situation right now.
Yeah, I think so. You want people that have been in and around the franchise that's well run. Probably the opposite of what this place has been for 18 months. And you want people to bring good football evaluators and people who can operate an effective franchise. And apparently, if the rumors are to be true, getting the injury reports being difficulty behind the scenes in the building. So you think it's got to be the only ways up. I think it's so hard to be able to tell, who the best guys are, because what have they actually been involved with? What decisions did they make? I think it's, unless you're in the industry, it's difficult to know. But hopefully that time will tell. When do you think the likely hire, if it is to be the GM first, will happen? Do you think we'll have to wait till sort of early February after the Super Bowl?
No, because then that kind of impacts the general manager's input into the head coaching hire. So I think it just depends on who they're taking a look at. If you're taking a look at Orgonzi, and then oh well, Kansas City is back in the Super Bowl. Yeah, then there you go. That probably impacts that particular hire. So it's just who they're targeting. Um, I hope it gets wrapped up before January 20th. I hope within the first week of the season of the off season, which for the rest of the NFL, that's the playoffs, um, that they get it taken care of. But
Yeah,
we'll
you
see
got it.
because you have to get these hires right. It's not just like, oh, we're a garbage team and we've been 2-14 the past 3 seasons and we are what we are. No, you've got Deshaun Watson. You've got a team that can make the playoffs, that it just gets 2 yards away from beating great teams like the Tennessee Titans and Indianapolis Colts, and that possibly could have, that was leading in the fourth quarter again at Pittsburgh against the Steelers. This is the kind of team you have. You've got to get this head coaching hire right. You can't. Jacksonville, they can mess it up after they fire Doug Marone and all. They can goof that one up. They're in pretty bad shape. But with Houston, they have got to get this hire right, and it has nothing to do so much with the first round. Not having the first and second round picks and the salary cap space. Even if you were just absolutely in the margins, in the black on that. It doesn't matter. It's the fact that you've got this decade of opportunity with Deshaun Watson under center that you have got to get this hire right, both of them.
Yeah, it's right, and let's hope they do. Let's hope they do. We've got a game coming up this Sunday, Mark. The visit of Cincinnati to NRG Stadium sort of rings memories of the last minute Randy Bullock missed field goal. I think that was was that Christmas or Christmas Eve a couple of years ago. You think it's a good opportunity just to get a fifth win of the season, and you've got to think the Tennessee game's probably going to mean something now, as in week 17, but certainly the Joe Burrow-less Bengals and DJ Reader-less as well. We'll see the return of Christian Covington. But it feels like a chance to get a win. But they did put a good performance in against Pittsburgh last night.
Yeah, I was shocked that they beat the Steelers. Um, but I think that Houston they'll play a close game with them, but they'll come away with the victory. I wrote in USA Today what it was supposed to be. I forget what my prediction was. I think my prediction may have been 27-19, Houston over Cincinnati. I think that, you'll get your mix of Fairbairn field goals and Deshaun Watson touchdowns and limiting the Bengals to field goals themselves. So that's what I see as 27-19.
Yeah, I think we're opening 7.5 point favourites on the spread. So yeah, I think you're probably in the right area there. I mean, I probably would have said we would have gone to Chicago and put in a performance like I'd probably expect this week, and that didn't happen. So hopefully this team can put it together and get a fifth win. I didn't, and I think interesting, about the Pittsburgh game, because of all the games that that we've lost, that was probably the one that sticks in my mind the most, because it felt like it would just easily on another day. And I know they've lost Bud Dupree up front and all the and they lost their linebacker. Was it Devin White? So I know it's not Devin White. It's the other one, the one from Michigan, isn't it? The Mike linebacker in their team. So they of all the games that we've lost against teams that that haven't been these divisional heartbreaking losses, you think that one's one of the one that and include Minnesota in that the week after, but that one feels like we were pretty close with them, and then for them to be sitting at 11-0 at one point, you thought they've had a reasonably straightforward schedule to get to that point, and now they've started to come away from the the reign of form they're in, considering the injuries. So I don't know how much you read into that, and
I feel like that was the one that the whole season turned
yeah,
on that one, because if they win that game, then you're 1-2, and you've recovered from having to face the top of the conference for the first 3 weeks, and then you have a little momentum, and you're not playing as uh, on edge against the Vikings. You probably save O'Brien's job. You beat the Jaguars as expected. And then you're really 3-2 heading into the Tennessee game. And then maybe the tenor of the season changes at that point, and then you end up 5-5 going. Not 5-5, but maybe at that point, yeah, you're 3-3, I think, going into the bye. And then no, you would have been either 3-4, 4-3 going into the bye, and then at that point you come out, you beat Jacksonville, you should have beat the Browns, maybe you beat them, and it's a whole different season at that point, and maybe you still don't make the playoffs and O'Brien gets fired, but it's not over by week 14, week 13 because of the fumble against Indianapolis. I just feel like the whole season changed in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh, I mean, I don't want to bash them too much, but to me, the two biggest frauds in the conference are Pittsburgh and Tennessee. Because Pittsburgh, they almost lost to Garrett Gilbert and the Dallas Cowboys on November 8th.
Yeah, and the
And
Browns to a
then
degree.
they should have lost to Houston in week 3. I mean, they pull it out against Tennessee, and like I said, I mean Tennessee, they just kind of, to me, the real team in the conference in the division that we'll see if they end up division champs. I don't know. It's kind of a long shot. It should be the Indianapolis Colts, the fraud in the division, in my opinion. The Tennessee Titans. They just, how do you get beat by the Cleveland Browns 41-5 at home? How does that happen? Baltimore knows how to take care of them. Pittsburgh knows how to take care of them. If you're one of the top dogs in the conference, how do you let that happen at home? So
Yeah.
that's my opinion. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's I think you're spot on, Mark. It feels like it could have gone so many ways, and there's a huge job on this defense to turn that around. And I think that could be a 2 to 3 year process to get back to the heights of game winning contributions that we've been accustomed to in Houston. But as you said, we've always got Deshaun, and I think Sunday, despite the loss, and it's salt in the wounds because we've not got those draft picks to fall back on if your season just kind of spirals out of control, like we've just said. But we've still got a player under center, and that's, as you said, there's a window of opportunity here, and it's been a tough season, the latter half when it's all become meaningless. But
Yeah, I don't interrupt, but this is a quarterback's game. So you've got the winning piece, and really because it's a quarterback's game, he can actually help your defense, because if Watson is able to build leads, then you can turn your defense loose, and then they can make any quarterback look bad. And then teams are not running the ball as much because they're having to keep up with Deshaun and the offense, and then they can pin their ears back and cultivate sacks. So they've got the winning element. They've got the piece in Deshaun Watson.
yeah, the irony of looking for the piece for so many years, you find the piece and everything else around it disappears. But hopefully we'll be entering 1 week closer to a new dawn with or without a win at Cincinnati. That was Mark Lane from the Texans Wire. Thank you very much for him for his time making the first appearance on the podcast. Please check us out at podcasttexans.com. Rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And hopefully we'll be back next week to talk a 5th win of the season. Don't think I'll be saying that 2 weeks to go against the Cincinnati Bengals.